Well, good morning. My name is Jackie Anderson, and I'd like to welcome you to our summer weekly online learning series. Thanks for joining us today. Today's session is Calm and Courageous Leadership with Dr. Mo Fahnestock. I'm going to introduce Mo in a moment, but as we begin to wind down our summer weekly series, I want to give you a chance to update your calendars for our final two sessions. So next week on Wednesday, August 19th, we've got Dr. Andrea Mulberg. She's a former St. Thomas professor, and she'll be talking about working through conflict in our personal and professional lives. She just dropped a book titled Emergency Kit for Finding Common Ground. Then our capstone event on the summer series is on Thursday, August 27th, with Don McPherson on 12 Trends of Living and Working. And Don actually just wrapped up another season of the 12 Geniuses podcast. And he is the former president of Modern Survey, an organization committed to finding emerging trends. So this is going to be a great wrap to our summer online learning series. Now, with the conclusion of our capstone event, we're going to be sending out a survey to all of you who participated this summer. Really, this weekly online survey or series was designed to serve you during this crazy time. We wanted something that was free, weekly, relevant, and focused on professional development. So I'm going to tease that survey for the next few weeks because we really want your input. And we'll be returning to our monthly series come this fall. So with that, our plan for today, I'm going to hand over this digital platform in a moment to our speaker. And as always, please feel free to use the chat feature to send me any questions. We're going to try to reserve the majority of the questions for the end and just address them to all panelists. As always, we'll try to wrap up by 8:50, 8:55 at the latest. And if you have any difficulty or you need to step away, please know we're recording this and we'll send you the link on Monday. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mo Fahnestock. Mo actually teaches both in our degree and non-degree programs here at the University of St. Thomas. He teaches MBA and undergraduate students in social entrepreneurship courses in the Schultz School, and is faculty director of our non-degree Institute on Executive Director Leadership, serving nonprofits across the entire region. Actually, Mo has become the go-to consultant for nonprofit boards. Mo has been teaching leadership for decades and was selected to be certified in the Dare to Lead Facilitator course in March of 2019. And if you registered for today's session, I have a feeling you know a little bit about Brené Brown's groundbreaking work in vulnerability. So Mo has his PhD and master's from the University of Minnesota, his bachelor's degree from the University of Colorado. He has been a longtime friend to the University of St. Thomas. It's my pleasure to welcome my colleague and my good friend, Dr. Mo Fahnestock.
Thank you, Jackie. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with you and with all of our listeners. This is a really fun and important topic to step into this morning. This whole adventure we're all going through, because there isn't an area of our society, our community, that isn't going through dramatic change. And so how we bring calm and courageous leadership to the moment that we're in is just really an important piece. And as I go through this morning, what I'd like to do is share a little bit of both the grounded theory research that Brené Brown has developed, but also applications that we've used with nonprofits and with leaders here in the Twin Cities and beyond. So we'll share a little bit of that as we go through. What I'm going to do is switch over and bring in my slides and walk you through these. And what we're going to see here as we go through is there's 4 core skill sets in developing Dare to Lead, Calm and Courageous Leadership. And we're going to talk about those as we flow through this. But what I want to do in terms of setting the stage for this is actually to ask our listeners to use the chat function in just a moment. I want to take us in and I want to have a little conversation about what are the things that are impacting you and your leadership, you and your organizations right now. As we look at the rest of 2020 and moving into 2021, what kinds of things are happening in and around your organization. So to do that, what I want to do is step over here and take us for a moment out of downtown Minneapolis. And we're going to launch out of there. We're going to take ourselves up and out of Minnesota, out of North America. And I want to take you up to Greenland, a little fishing village that my brother has been doing global warming research in and out of, called Ilulissat Harbor. And Ilulissat is known for being right next to the Jacobshavn Glacier. That glacier right here flows right out of the harbor. And this fishing village has boats that every day travel. This is a time lapse that Mark took for me. This is 2 days worth of time lapse photography of the harbor that their boats travel through to go out and do their daily work. We're going to go up the glacier to this spot up here. That's Mark on the side of the glacier with his instruments. And we're going to take a moment and look at what's happening at this point in the glacier.
The cavity face is 300, sometimes 400 feet tall. Pieces of ice were shooting up out of the ocean 600 feet and then falling. The only way that you can really try to put it into scale with human reference is if you imagine Manhattan. And all of a sudden, all of those buildings just start to rumble and quake and peel off and just fall over, and roll around. This whole massive city just breaking apart in front of your eyes. We're just observers. These two little dots on the side of the mountain. We watched and recorded the largest witness calving event ever caught on tape.
It took 100 years for it to retreat 8 miles from 1900 to 2000. From 2000 to 2010, it retreated 9 miles. So in 10 years, it retreated more than it had in the previous 100.
So with that idea and concept of icebergs and the increased amount of change, I have a question for those listeners here, and that is, what are the kinds of changes, what are the kinds of icebergs that you are watching? If you would go to your chat feature and type in one or two of the things that are going on in your world. What are the things that you are paying attention to? What kinds of things are you seeing that are flowing through here? I'm seeing things like school reopenings and the whole question around that, working from home, workforce, supply chain issues, the automation of technology, regulatory changes, reorganizations, engagement of employees and the challenge of that, I'm guessing. Doing more with less. Oh, they're starting to fly in. Thank you. Launching a business at this point in time. Staff turnover, social justice, remote leadership, fear. Hyperpolitics permeating operations and relationships. Layoffs. Things that take us into really challenging pieces. Diversity, disconnection from family, income disparity, safety, elderly father moved in with my family. Things that are very personal, things that are very organizational, things that are happening in our community. People having trouble finding new jobs or work. Uncertainty with what has been stable. I'm seeing the murder of George Floyd challenging all of us to look at systemic racism. Lots and lots of moving pieces right now. The increase is quite a challenge with what's happening. So let's take a step. Thank you for sharing. It is, and that was my question. What icebergs are you sailing through? Lack of leadership at different levels. This is really, really an incredible and challenging time. And I think what's fascinating is that Brené's grounded theory research, which is really comes from first the lived experience. So what she did was she did thousands of interviews with leaders at all levels across different kinds of organizations to develop her theories and what pieces fit through. So some of those things that came out of, and I had put in a few, but you guys have given a whole new set of different kinds of things. Of course, COVID is an impact of us on the economy, racism, the whole call for diversity and inclusion. General Mills this morning, the CEO of General Mills this morning announced the whole effort to try and hire more Black managers within it. Oprah Magazine's cover this month is Breonna Taylor, the EMT that was shot and killed in a police raid that was mistakenly done in her apartment. The whole issues around racism is a major, major challenge. The environment and global warming. We're at a tipping point, and we've known that for decades with what's going on, schools and distance learning, and then all of the stress that these added pieces come together are just really, really a challenge. So I want to start, before I step into the Dare to Lead curriculum, to give a definition that I use and we use in the Institute on Executive Director Leadership, because it sets up the whole premise. And I actually shared this definition with Brené when I went through her training a year and a half ago. And the definition that we use is authentic leadership is the courage to call forth authentic action in our lives, organizations, communities, and the world. And we've got an incredible toolbox of authentic actions that we can take to work our way through. What we didn't have until Brené's research came along is how do we develop the courage to step into and work with these incredibly challenging, these incredible challenges that we have in our lives. And so I want to frame what this looks like in terms of how we develop courage in individual leaders and in leadership teams. So thinking about, and this is the process that the curriculum takes us through, but it's also something that we can do individually with ourselves, and we can do with our leadership teams within and throughout our whole organization. So I've been working with, and I just finished using this curriculum with a charter school. Phenomenal leader and founder. This charter school is now 19 years old. It's going to celebrate its 20th year. Incredible, exciting year next year. It's expanding its facilities. They've been able to prove that their process or their educational systems are really successful for kids of color. The school scores are equivalent and higher than other schools with similar demographics of student population. They know that going into this fall with the transition they've been through with school, that there's going to be a whole lot of more challenges as they move into the new school year. We use the curriculum to open up the conversations and deepen the learning around leadership and leading the challenges. Because when you think about it, when you work with a school community, when you work with an organization, when you work across a company or a government setting, you've got to get multiple people to move in the same direction and be able to move and be agile as we go through the changes and learnings, as we figure out what works and what doesn't work. So when we think about how to do a learning model, this is the way we begin to do it with Dare to Lead and build those things out. The first is building awareness. And one of the most interesting things in the curriculum is that the whole curriculum starts with an awareness around vulnerability. And we'll talk just briefly about that in a little bit. But building awareness first, and then building knowledge and skills, so that people have knowledge and skills that they can try out, they can practice, they can take action, and then reflect on the success of those things. And most importantly, get feedback as to how things are working, not working, and how to continue to make correction. But the big thing is, and what really is powerful, like that leadership team for that school, is when we do it in concert with both developing individual leaders and developing the entire team, so that the team begins to feed back with one another and build the knowledge and recognition as to things moving forward with it. So let me take you into the curriculum just a little bit. We're going to touch base on the 4 skill sets and then open it up for questions and see where that goes. So here is the 4 skill sets, very briefly. The first one is rumbling with vulnerability. Let me give you a definition of vulnerability that came from the grounded research. Vulnerability is 3 things. It's defined as 3 things. Number 1, it's risk. Number 2, it's uncertainty. And number 3, it's emotional exposure. When we are in a situation where there's risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure, we are rumbling with vulnerability. That could be stepping into a tough conversation. That could be stepping into a relationship that's not working the way we need it to work. That could be stepping into a situation within a system in a business that isn't functioning the way we need it to function. It's about that courage to step in and call forth authentic action in our lives, our organizations, our community, and the world. It's finding that process to do it. The second skill set is living into our values, and we'll talk a little bit about that. A lot of people will talk about values, but we've got to take them a couple of steps beyond and ask the tough question around those. We'll do that in a minute. The third skill set is building, braving, trust. Braving is an acronym. We're going to go through those, that an acronym, and talk about the components that Brené found in her research and how we actually develop those within the leadership team and then throughout the whole culture of the organization. Because if we don't have trust, it's impossible to be able to step forward and to move forward with where things are going. And the fourth skill set's really interesting. It's learning to rise, because if we are moving new initiatives, piloting new programs, trying to make pivots, we will make mistakes, we will stumble, we will fall. Many of you may know the arena story that Brené uses, the quote that she uses in that. We have to know that we can rise after making mistakes, after stumbling. With those 4 skill sets, we can move with grounded confidence, with calm and courage. We can move into the learning mode that takes us through these challenging times. And that's the key. We're not going to have the answers. We're going to figure out what options that we have and then move those forward and see how well they perform. So let's step into these a little bit and go a little deeper. So this first one is wrestling with vulnerability. And when Brené started her research around shame and vulnerability, she found that people framed vulnerability around shame, scarcity, fear, and uncertainty. That was one of the reasons why the wrestle and the rumble with vulnerability is a real challenge to most of us, is that these things pop up, and those are the first things that we don't want to happen. But when we understand a little further about how and what vulnerability brings us, it is the birthplace of love, belonging, and joy. One of the critical things in most workplaces, schools, other settings, is that feeling of belonging. I am a part of this organization. I am a part of fulfilling the promise of this organization, bringing something to the world that actually makes a difference and creates a difference in people's lives. But more than love, belonging, and joy, vulnerability and being able to rumble with it is the birthplace of courage, empathy, trust, innovation, creativity, accountability, adaptability, inclusivity, equity. It's the birthplace in where we go to have the hard conversations, to get feedback, problem solving, ethical decision making, and resilience and resetting our direction and our path as to where we are going. So let's go a little further with vulnerability and rumbling with vulnerability. The first thing is there's 6 myths of vulnerability that we have to break through. And those 6 start with vulnerability is weakness. Our culture frames the concept of vulnerability as weakness. That if we can't dominate and oversee, and what happens when we get into that situation is there's all kinds of situations where there's risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. We're never going to get away from that. Whether on a personal level, organizational level, community level, we're always going to have those situations. That's stepping in, and if you think about it, when you've seen people, the key is when you see an actor, when you see a leader who truly steps in and presents him or herself as who they are, and recognizes and makes themselves fully present in it, they are being vulnerable and able to work with it. The second myth is, and a lot of people will say this, is I don't do vulnerability. Bottom line is you can't get away from not living in risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. We all do vulnerability. We have to do it better. We have to be able to step in, rumble with it, and work with it. The third myth is this myth of I can go it alone. We don't come into this world alone. We cannot move forward in our organizations, in our communities. We can't go forward and create the kind of world we want to have without going with others. The fourth myth is that you can engineer uncertainty and discomfort out of vulnerability. Here's what I want to frame really carefully is that we're talking about relational vulnerability, not systems vulnerability. We have to create systems that are accurate, consistent, able to deliver and perform at the levels we need them to perform at. It's the relationships of the people around that system that we need to have vulnerability in, because they need to be agile in giving feedback as to how that system's working. Not get stuck in a blame, shame, defensive mode, but to be staying with that system, especially as we weave our way through these icebergs and challenges as to what's happening. And these challenges are not going away. They're going to continue. The fifth myth is trust comes before vulnerability. This is the chicken and the egg question. Which one comes first? They actually both come along together. And we build trust one small step at a time. We also can destroy trust one small step at a time. It usually isn't one incident. And the sixth myth is that vulnerability is disclosure. And over disclosure is not vulnerability. What we're talking about is not oversharing. We're talking about showing up. We're talking about being present. We're talking about leaning in, and we're talking about taking our armor off. We'll add to that in just a moment. It is relational vulnerability that we're talking about. We're not talking about systemic vulnerability. It's not, and this is what's fascinating. In the research that Brené did, she found that in a lot of places will say that fear is the problem that we've got to overcome. What Brené found was that fear was ubiquitous. It was everywhere, inconsistent. If you are leading an organization, you have fears and concerns about what's happening in our market, what's happening in our organizations, what's happening in our constituents, what's happening for my staff. Those fears are not going away. The challenges and the interesting piece that she found in her research was that it's the armor we use to protect our perceived vulnerabilities. It's the armor we put on that actually holds us back. And we'll dig into that in just a little bit. Well, let me stay there for just a second. So there's actually 16 types of armor that show up. And at the end of this, I'm going to put up a link where you guys can go. There's 2 sets of worksheets that I put together that if you would like to dig in further to this work and this research, there's 2 sets of research resources, the worksheets that you can go out and get. I'll share that link with, and it'll also come out in the email and the follow-up recording. But let me give you a couple of examples of the types of armor that we put on as leaders. One type of armor is being a knower and being right. I know the answers. I am right about where this thing is, and and being a leader means that I have to be, versus that type of armor versus being a learner and getting it right, especially working to get it right together, figuring out, learning how we're going to make these turns, how we're going to move through this changing environment that we're in. Being a learner and getting it right. Hiding behind cynicism is a form of armor. Instead of modeling clarity, kindness, and hope. Another one is driving perfectionism and fostering a fear of failure versus modeling and encouraging healthy striving, empathy, and self-compassion. These are the movement of moving from armored leadership that actually hides us and keeps us away from risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure, and moves us towards daring leadership, calm, courageous leadership that puts all of us together working on moving these things forward. I'm not going to go into all 16. I only get a small amount of time with you. When we get to do this together, either as individuals or as leadership teams, it's either a 16 or a 24-hour curriculum that we dive in deep, unbundle these things. And we actually, in the 24-hour training program, we actually have assessment tools that go in and look at what kinds of armor does our culture, our organizational culture, force us to put on, to be able to be part of this culture. And we work our way through taking off that armor so that we can be fully present, we can be fully engaged, we can be in the moment and where it's going. So let me take you into the second skill set of Dare to Lead. Living into our values. Now we talk, and oftentimes we hear a lot about knowing your values, knowing your organization's values. But here's what gets so important, not only in her research, but we've seen this in many, many different research pieces around organizations. Less than 10% of the organizations and companies frame their values with observable behaviors and actions. And even a smaller number of organizations actually assess their effectiveness of showing up that way with observable behaviors and actions. The last thing that gets really interesting, and a very short story, 2 weeks ago, I had a text at 6 a.m. in the morning from a CEO who was going into a meeting within an hour. And he was really upset because his values and his buttons had been totally pushed by the folks that were going to be in this meeting with him. And we had a deep conversation for 45 minutes around what does this mean when your values and what behaviors and actions you want to live through are being challenged with it. And one of the things we didn't get to, he had to figure out what he was going to do. But what we talked about was that if you truly live your values, they're going to cost you something. They're going to cost you relationships. They're going to cost you money. They're going to cost you time, because you have to go further to go the path of what your values guide you on than just conforming to whatever will and whim is around you or force that's around you. So one of the things that's really fascinating and challenging when we talk about living our values is to recognize that when we do live our values, they may cost us something. And we've got to be really, really clear about this is the path. This is the work we're going to do to make sure that we can do it. And we're not going to go down that path. This is where we're going to go and make it work. The next set that we're going to get into, and we're going to spend a little time in braving trust, because this is a powerful acronym. And think about building trust, the marble jar concept. Every time we do something positive, every time someone around us does something that helps us build trust, it's like dropping a marble into a jar. Filling that jar with small actions. And that's what part of her research found, was that when we do small actions, do little steps towards one another that are grounded in those values, that recognize the vulnerability that we're in, the risk that we're in, the emotional exposure that we're each going through, each of those little steps builds a trust. Now, in building trust, braving the acronym gives us an outline of the kinds of actions that we can take to build that trust inside of a team. And when a leadership team acts in these ways, it ripples through the whole company. It ripples through the whole organization. One of the things, and I'm going to plant this seed right now, and then we're going to go into those acronyms. Anxiety is, as an emotion, is contagious. Anxiety as an emotion is contagious. Calm as an emotion is contagious. Courage, stepping into places where there is risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure, is contagious, because everyone else begins to see and then step in and recognize that we can move in these directions. We've got to recognize that we are all emotional beings. We make decisions and take action around those emotions more than we do through logic. So if we can promote calm, courageous actions, we can actually imbued that feeling and emotion through our organization all the way out to the constituents and customers we serve. So let's walk into braving and think about these aspects of how we can build trust within our organization. The B stands for boundaries. Setting boundaries and being clear about what's okay, what's not okay, and most importantly, why it's okay. I see some great questions coming in. We're going to circle around to those when I get through with this, and we'll do it. I love the questions that are coming in through the chat. So boundaries is the first thing, and being really clear about what those are, both within the leadership team, but throughout the whole organization, and even out into the community or the constituency or the market you serve. That's really critical. R, pretty straightforward, reliability. You do what you say you will do. Staying aware of your competencies and limitations. I'm going to move out of the way so you don't overpromise and are able to deliver on the commitments and balance competing priorities. In this day and age, we are going through a lot of competing priorities. We've got to be very, very careful not to get stretched too far and actually be able to deliver what we say we will do. The next piece is accountability. And the definition that merged out of that is owning your own mistakes, owning your mistakes, apologizing, and making amends. We're not going to be perfect. We are going to be, if we're in a learning mode, we are going to stumble. We are going to make bad decisions. We need to come back to those, circle back, and say, I realize what we have done or not done, and need to make amends and actually do it. The next piece in this is vault. Interesting. Listen to this definition. You don't share. A vault is the concept that we don't share information or experiences that are not ours to share. The water cooler, the coffee down the hall, sharing what's happening in different things. When we do that kind of action, we build mistrust inside of the culture that I can't share important critical things or they're going to get shared all over the place. So what's critical in here is that we get into a pattern where if there's something that needs to be shared and there's people involved that need to be engaged in that, you bring them together. You don't just run around and then take it up or down or across. You actually bring the critical people together and dig into, be vulnerable and dig into the situation that you need to do. The next piece is integrity, choosing courage over comfort, choosing what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy, practicing our values, not just professing them. Integrity. Non-judgment. This is a powerful one, and this is really, really interesting. I can ask for what I need, and you can ask for what you need without judgment. We can talk about how we feel without judgment. Now let's do this for a second here. We're talking primarily about professional feelings and feelings that occur because of what's happening in the workplace. We're not talking about all the other issues potentially outside of work, but we also have to recognize that we're whole people. So one of the things that is part of what we work on in terms of building trust and recognizing it is with this non-judgment piece is building the belief that people are doing the best they can with the tools they can, with the tools they have, the information they have at the moment. What's fascinating is too often we believe that people are not living that level. And what happens is we go in and we develop this cynicism about the people around us, and we can never move further or raise our expectations as to how our people are, whether or not we can and they can become and get better at what they're doing. So moving into a non-judgmental respect and just believing that people are doing the best they can do is an important critical piece as to how we can build trust in our organizations. And the last one in this is generosity. And that's part of that non-judgmental. These two pieces go together, extending the most generous interpretation to the intentions, words, and actions of others. That actually becomes contagious as we have trust growing in our teams and in our organizations. That the generosity towards one another grows as we extend an interpretation of the intentions, words, and actions of others. One of the things that's really, really critical in all my nonprofit work, we talk about what's the authentic promise that your organization delivers. Every organization, every company, every governmental entity, and nonprofit has a promise that they exist to fulfill. If we are working on intentions, words, and actions that are working towards fulfilling that promise, we're all moving in the same direction. When we get lost and begin to lose what it is we're working on together, that trust breaks down internally and it breaks down externally. So getting really clear about what we promise to fulfill, what values guide us, are all absolutely critical things to have as part of what the whole organization, the thinking of each individual, the thinking of the team together, the thinking of the whole organization moving together as we navigate the icebergs that we're going through. So the fourth skill set, and this question, do you believe that people are doing the best they can? That question actually is more for you, because it's easier on us. It's easier on me if I believe you're doing the best you can, because then I can come alongside you, support you where you need it, and help you move along with it. If I believe you're not doing that, I may step back from it and not come alongside and help you to move along. So building relationships of trust, whether they're internal and inside your organization, between staff, or externally with customers, constituents, these are the critical things that happen. And that question about, do you believe people are doing the best they can, wrestle with that, rumble with that, because you're setting up your own vulnerability for where that goes. So now what I want to do is touch the fourth skill set. Now we're going to start to open this thing up, and that's learning to rise. In this whole thing, we have to recognize that we're going to make turns as we work our way through these challenging situations, that initiatives, organizations, and leaders are going to fail, stumble, and fall. We're going to end up on the arena floor. And we got to pay attention to how and what happens to us as we experience something that isn't working. So we can go into shame, we can dig ourselves into shame spirals, we can dig ourselves into blame spirals, we can dig ourselves into piling on the armor that keeps us from coming out and re-engaging and moving things forward. So here's what it begins, and we talk through and we work through. Knowing how to rise and that one can rise is an absolute critical skill set. We're going to make turns, things are going to fall apart, we're going to have to move things forward. I have hit the end of those. We're at 8:42, so we got a little bit of time to ask some questions. I've got some questions here that have come through chat, but Jackie, what do you want to do? Let me switch and get you so that I'm back out here as a whole person. What shall we go to some of the chat questions? Where do you want to go?
Yeah, so first of all, let me thank you for that clear roadmap of that content. Thank you so much for that. And as you can imagine, the chat feature did kind of blow up. So I'm going to moderate a couple questions for you.
Love it.
And again, we'll keep our target of wrapping up by no later than 8:55.
Okay.
All right, the first one. It would seem that the best outcome of living our values can only happen when my values and the organization's values align. Can you say more about this and what I should do if that's not the case?
Oh, I love it. This is an incredibly important piece. And what I'm hearing is my personal values are not necessarily in alignment with my organizational values. And so there's a tension within these. One of the things that I do with coaching and other kinds of things is I help people write an exit card and a commitment card. And you know where this came from, Jackie. It came from Bob Terry and his guidance of so many leaders who drafted that authentic leadership piece. An exit card, if we don't know the answers to our exit card, where could I be working if I wasn't working here? Immediately move towards intermediate, long term. And the second question, what 2 or 3 things have to happen for me to play my exit card? If you don't know the 2 answers to those things, then you're stuck. You have no personal power within the situation you're in. On the other side of the exit card is a commitment card. What 2 or 3 things are happening that I am so excited about? I have to stay in this position because I'm going to grow, I'm going to learn, I'm going to be able to contribute. It's a good fit. It's got the right amount of stretch for me. So that whole question around and I want that skill set there for the person who's asking this question. You've got to wrestle with those tensions. And part of what it is my question for you is, you probably have done a lot of work around your own values and what's important to you. is your perception of the values that are happening in the organization, is that a true perception? Are those what are really the way that organization is grounded? If that's the case, you're looking at your exit and commitment card. Does that fit? It may be that the organization needs to clarify what those values are. And again, what are the actionable behaviors and actions we want to see about living out those values by the organization and ourselves in our own lives, so that we have integrity to live with it. Not an easy thing. This rub happens in a lot of situations. So long-winded answer, sorry, but I think that's important to hit both of those, Jackie.
No, that was great. Thank you. Next question. How is this similar or dissimilar from servant leadership and other leadership models?
Love it. Love it. It is. In many ways, this encompasses servant leadership. What it's doing, I believe, and what the blessing that Brené is bringing into us is the ability to build those skill sets, both as individuals and as leadership teams. So, and together, we can find the path of learning and moving our organization through these challenges that we're doing. Servant leadership oftentimes has that servant one leader. What I think is powerful in terms of how we approach it through Dare to Lead and building those skill sets is that we are doing it together. It is all of us that have to make that thing work. So the parallels are all in there. The parallels are all in there. And it is it's an incredibly powerful complement to servant leadership.
All right, thank you. Next question. Is the contagious nature of emotions simply empathy?
Empathy is a grounding. Is it simply empathy? I don't know if I can answer fully what that is. What I can say is that we are neurologically wired to be in community with one another. Human beings need to be with other human beings. We're neurologically wired to be in relationship with people. So it's how we grow, it's how we learn, it's how we even build an identity of who we are as individuals. We're part of a family, we're part of an organization, we're part of a community. Empathy plays an absolute deep part of all of those things. And what's fascinating about empathy is that empathy, when we frame it in a really healthy way, we frame empathy not as understanding the situation or context that someone's in, because they may have a situation context that we'll never experience. It's being empathetic and connecting to the emotions that that person's going through and recognizing where it is. So, and all of us can go through we've all had the emotion and the experience of loss, of frustration, of failure, of shame. We've all had those pieces. How we step in and come alongside the individual, or even the failure of a project and the team is important to do. So I don't know if I have the full answer to that, but those are the pieces that I really understand and we get into and I recognize.
Great. I'm going to go on to the next question.
Good. I love it.
How do you build the organizational culture to devalue the water cooler conversations?
Yeah, that is powerful, and absolutely critical. That whole vault. I do not share stories that are not mine to share unless I'm standing next to and with the individuals we're all talking about. Becomes an absolutely important piece for building trust. Just dropping marbles into the marble jar of how we come together to do it. What I use is, in that coming together is all about, are we fulfilling the promise? So that question around, what is the promise of our organization? What's the promise of our services, our products, what we do? if we are all working in that direction and keeping that clarity, it helps guide us to keep the vault as part of what we're doing. And you don't do it on by one basis. You actually need to do these conversations and this work together so that you each other are reinforcing it. You draft definitions of what it means not to share stories that are yours, that are not yours to share. You've got to do that learning and accountability about living, truly living that concept of the vault. So it's got to be done as a whole, and you're going to work your way towards being able to do that. It takes maturing culture and making that happen to grow together to make that happen.
Thank you. And I'm going to try to group two questions so you can kind of take the theme here. What if your organizational culture doesn't evenly support vulnerability? Mm-hmm. And then there's another question that talks about authentic action and organization politics feel like polarities. Can you say more? So it's all about this culture and what's embraced and maybe what's not.
So one of the things that that is so important and is so critical is that leadership takes enough time to really understand what's going on inside of their own heads, inside of the minds and thinking of the individual staff and the staff as a whole across the organization. More than half of what happens inside of leadership and in organizations is just how we think and how we frame the realities of what's going on. So that polarity between organizational politics, is that what the phrase was? Mm-hmm. and the
authentic action.
Yeah, building authentic action. That's inside the thinking and the perceptions of what's going on. We've mm-hmm. got to bring that thinking out and really honestly step vulnerably into the conversation about how are you seeing this? Why are you seeing it that way? You're passionate around those areas. What is it that's so important? I need to understand because I'm passionate, but I think I have a different angle to where that passion is coming. We've got to be relationally vulnerable to share those kinds of things. Otherwise, the polarities grow and the schism grows and the culture falls into the bottom of it. So it's surfacing and diving into these tough conversations. Diversity and inclusion and building more diverse workforces is a tough conversation. Owning the fact that systemic racism is part of both organizational cultures, our community culture, our legal system, our justice system. We've got to be very, very careful that we aren't perpetuating that we're actually seeing it, recognizing it, and working to move to a more accountable, equitable, and just-based culture in our organizations and our communities. It's not easy work. That's why it's boiled and blown up here in Minneapolis and then around the world. It's not an easy piece.
All right, Mo, I'm going to try to sneak in one more question as we wrap up this session. Can you share tips on how to rise? And I also know we will forward some resources as well, but that sounds like the perfect way to kind of capstone this.
Yeah, absolutely. I do really, really encourage whoever's asking this question, Learning to Rise, pick up Brené's book around that theme. It is just delicious. And get it if you want to in an audio version. But Learning to Rise is recognizing, and it starts with, what emotions am I? And when you start thinking about what emotions you're in, get curious about that. Get curious about these emotions and how they are impacting you, both your thinking, physiologically impacting you, and emotionally impacting you. What is happening as you go through those processes, and then begin to step back from those and understand that that's only part of who you are. It's only part of your whole experience. And time will move And you will move beyond this as you begin to stand up and do it. What we're doing and being very careful not to do is to stand up and begin putting on armor. So one of the pieces of armor is numbing, whether it's disappearing into learning or disappearing into alcohol, drugs, into emotional or other kinds of armoring up. We've got to be careful, and that's why that curiosity about how we emotionally are responding leads us to be able to open that reality up and then move beyond it. We do it as individuals, we also do it as teams, and we do it as organizations. You'll see the stages of an individual, a team, an organization go through these stumbles. So watching where this goes. I see somebody repeating the name of the book. I will put that in, and we'll put that in the response and follow up of this. It's Rising Strong. Somebody nailed it. Thank you, Cassie. Rising Strong is the name of the book. There's a long answer. I apologize, but thank you so much.
Yeah, well, let me end by saying thank you, Mo. A great presentation. And as promised, we'll be sending out a link this session in the next few days with access to those resources Mo has talked about. If you enjoyed this session, mini MBA for nonprofits that Mo teaches in starts on September 8th. And also any remaining classes in August, we're still taking a 15% discount. So thank you for joining us. And I just want to remind you, next week, we have, on Wednesday, August 19th, we have Dr. Andrea Molberg, Dealing with Conflict. Stay well, stay safe, and thanks again for joining us today.